in which our happy couples learn that life is not easy, whether as newlyweds or as recent divorcees. Chapter 11. As he went into the studio, the artist Mikhailov looked his visitors over once again, and also noted in his imagination the expression of Vronsky's face, especially his cheekbones. Though his artistic sense worked incessantly, collecting material, though he felt an ever-increasing excitement because the moment for judgment of his work was approaching, he quickly and subtly formed an idea of these three people out of imperceptible tokens. This one, Golenishev, was a local Russian. Mikhailov did not remember his last name, or where he had met him, and what they had talked about. He remembered only his face, as he did all the faces he had ever seen. But he also remembered that his was one of the faces laid away in his imagination in the huge department of the falsely important and poor in expression. A mass of hair and a very open forehead lent a superficial importance to the face, on which there was merely a small, childish, anxious expression, focused above the narrow bridge of the nose. Vronsky and Mademoiselle Karenina, in Mikhailov's conjecture, must have been noble and wealthy Russians who, like all wealthy Russians, understood nothing about art, but pretended to be amateurs and connoisseurs. They've probably already looked at all the old stuff, and now they're going around to the studios of the new ones. Some German charlatan, some fool of a pre-Raphaelite Englishman, and have come to me only to complete the survey, he thought. He knew very well the dilettante's manner, which was worse the more intelligent they were, of going to look at the studios of contemporary artists with the sole aim of having the right to say that art has declined, and that the more one looks at the new painters, the more one sees how inimitable the great old masters still are. He expected all that, and he saw it in their faces, saw it in the indifferent nonchalance with which they talked among themselves, looked at the mannequins and busts, and strolled about freely, waiting for him to uncover the painting. But despite that, all the while he was turning over his sketches, raising the blinds and removing the sheet, he felt a strong excitement, the more so because, though to his mind all noble and wealthy Russians had to be brutes and fools, he liked Vronsky, and especially Anna. "Here, if you please," he said, stepping aside with his fidgety gait and pointing to the picture. "It's the admonition of Pilate. Matthew, chapter 27, he said, feeling his lips beginning to tremble with excitement. He stepped back and stood behind them. For a few seconds, as the visitors silently looked at the picture, Mikhailov also looked at it, and looked with an indifferent, estranged eye. For those few seconds he believed in advance that the highest, the fairest judgment would be pronounced by them, precisely by these visitors whom he had so despised a moment ago. He forgot everything he had thought about his picture during the 3 years he had been painting it. He forgot all its virtues, which for him were unquestionable. He saw it with their indifferent, estranged new eyes, and found nothing good in it. He saw in the foreground the vexed face of Pilate and the calm face of Christ, and in the background the figures of Pilate's servants and the face of John, peering at all that was going on. each face grown in him with its own particular character after so much searching, after so many errors and corrections, each face that had brought him so much pain and joy, and all of them rearranged so many times to preserve the whole. The nuances of color and tone achieved with such difficulty, all this together, seen through their eyes, now seemed to him a banality repeated 1,000 times. The dearest face of all, the face of Christ, the focus of the picture, which had delighted him so when he discovered it, was quite lost for him when he looked at the picture through their eyes. He saw well painted, or even not so well painted. He now saw clearly a heap of defects, repetition of the endless Christ of Titian, Raphael, Rubens, with the same soldiers and Pilate. All this was banal, poor, old, and even badly painted, gaudy and weak. They would be right to speak falsely polite phrases in the artist's presence, and to pity him and laugh at him when they were alone. The silence became too painful for him, though it lasted no more than a minute. To break it and show that he was not excited, he took himself in hand and addressed Golenishev. "I believe I had the pleasure of meeting you," he said to him, anxiously turning to look now at Anna, now at Vronsky, so as not to miss a single detail in the expressions on their faces. "Why, yes. We met at Rossi's, remember? The evening of the recital by that young Italian lady, the New Rochelle." Golenishev replied freely, taking his eyes from the picture without the least regret, and turning to the artist. Noticing, however, that Mikhailov was waiting for an opinion on the picture, he said, "Your picture has progressed considerably since I last saw it, and now, as then, I find the figure of Pilate extraordinarily striking. One understands the man so well. A kind, nice fellow, but a functionary to the bottom of his soul, who knows not what he does, but it seems to me—" The whole of Mikhailov's mobile face suddenly beamed. His eyes lit up. He wanted to say something, but could not speak from excitement, and pretended he was coughing. Little as he valued Golenishev's ability to understand art, trivial as was the correct observation about the rightness of Pilate's expression as a functionary, offensive as it might have seemed to voice such a trivial observation first, while more important things were ignored, Mikhailov was delighted with this observation. He himself thought the same about the figure of Pilate as Golenishev did. That this opinion was one of a million opinions which, as Mikhailov well knew, would all be correct, did not diminish for him the significance of Golenishev's observation. He loved Golenishev for it, and from a state of dejection suddenly went into ecstasy. The whole painting at once came to life before him with all the complexity of everything that lives. Mikhailov again tried to say that he understood Pilate the same way, but his lips trembled disobediently, and he could not get the words out. Vronsky and Anna were also saying something in those soft voices in which people usually talk at exhibitions, partly so as not to insult the artist, partly so as not to say some foolishness aloud, as it is so easy to do when talking about art. It seemed to Mikhailov that the picture had made an impression on them as well. He went over to them. "How astonishing Christ's expression is," said Anna. Of all she saw, she liked that expression most. She felt it was the center of the picture, and therefore that praise of it would please the artist. One can see he pities Pilate. This was again one of the million correct opinions that could be held about his picture and the figure of Christ. She said he pitied Pilate. In Christ's expression there had to be pity, because there was in him the expression of love, unearthly peace, readiness for death, and an awareness of the vanity of words. Of course, there was the expression of a functionary in Pilate and of pity in Christ, because one embodied carnal and the other spiritual life. All this and many other things flashed Mikhailov's thoughts, and again his face beamed with ecstasy. Yes, and the way the figure's done, so much air, you can walk around it, said Golenishev, obviously indicating by this observation that he did not approve of the content and idea of the figure. Yes, amazing mastery, said Vronsky. How those figures in the background stand out. That's technique, he said, turning to Golenishev, and alluding to a previous conversation between them about Vronsky's despair of acquiring such technique. Yes, amazing, Golenishev and Anna agreed. In spite of the agitated state he was in, the remark about technique grated painfully on Mikhailov's heart, and, glancing angrily at Vronsky, he suddenly scowled. He had often heard this word, technique, and decidedly did not understand what it implied. He knew that it implied a mechanical ability to paint and draw, completely independent of content. He had often noticed, as in this present praise, that technique was opposed to inner virtue, as if it were possible to make a good painting of something bad. He knew that great attention and care were needed to remove the wrappings without harming the work itself, and to remove all the wrappings, but there was no art of painting, no technique here. If what he saw had also been revealed to a little child, or to his kitchen maid, they too would have been able to lay bare what they saw. But the most experienced and skillful painter-technician would be unable, for all his mechanical ability, to paint anything beside the boundaries of the constant. To paint anything unless the boundaries of the content were first revealed to him. Besides, he saw that if one were to speak of technique, he could not be praised for it. In all his paintings, present and past, his eye was struck by defects that came from the carelessness with which he had removed the wrappings, and that he could no longer correct without marring the whole work. And he still saw on almost all the figures and faces the remains of wrappings not yet completely removed, which marred the painting. One thing might be said, if you will allow me to make an observation, Golenishev observed. Oh, please do. I'll be very glad, said Mikhailov, smiling falsely. It is that you have made him a man-god, and not a god-man. However, I know that's what you meant to do. I could not paint a Christ whom I do not have in my soul, Mikhailov said sullenly. Yes, but in that case, if you'll allow me to say what I think, your picture is so good that my observation cannot harm it, and besides, it's my personal opinion. With you, it's different. The motif itself is different, but let's take Ivanov. I think that if Christ is to be reduced to the level of a historical figure, it would have been better if Ivanov had selected a different historical theme, something fresh, untouched. But what if this is the greatest theme available to art? If one seeks, one can find others, but the thing is that art doesn't suffer argument and reasoning, and in front of Ivanov's painting, a question arises both for the believer and for the unbeliever. Is he God or not? And destroys the unity of the impression. Why so? It seems to me, said Mikhailov, that for educated people the question can no longer exist. Golenishev disagreed with that, and, keeping to his first thought about the unity of the impression necessary for art, crushed Mikhailov. Mikhailov was excited, but unable to say anything in defense of his thinking. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.